Earlier we heard that it's very important, that it was very important not to hear a diagnosis from your therapist, as it can disturb the process of therapy. Now we'll do a changeover. We want to talk about diagnostics and diagnoses. And I think it came across that the patient, the person that is looking for help, he doesn't need the diagnosis. It's the experts who need these terms when they exchange opinions amongst each other. It's our language. We will go into that a bit more deeply when I tell you the story of diagnostics, and maybe to the word diagnosis. The Greek diagnosis is made of two words. Dia means through or apart, and gnosis is recognition or judgment. Diagnose means to keep apart and at the same time to distinguish and to recognize. And in this talk you'll see that the essence of psychiatric diagnosis exactly hits a spot there. It is to recognize what has that person, what he is or she is. With the physical illnesses, it seems to be easier. You do a diagnostics, you want to see what does the person have, and there you can set up a therapy. You have an idea, you have the healthy body, you know how the blood pressure should be normally. You can measure it, and if the measurement is going away from that, and it's a too high or too low blood pressure, and you can start a therapy. With the psyche, that's a lot more difficult, because you can imagine, and you ask, what is a normally functioning psyche? That's already a bit overwhelming question to answer that. And therefore we're opening the field on one hand from a psychological standpoint and from a psychiatric standpoint, how we can get close to it, how is the psyche operating, and how can we describe psychological illnesses and how you can put them into certain terms and how it can be done differently, or you could do it differently in the future. I have the story of psychiatry. I wrote it down, but then I realized yesterday by Anne and all this morning from Martin, we had already heard some of it. So I'd like to go further back on the time frame. In Stone Age remains, one found skulls with holes, and they seem to have, so people have survived this. And one was asking themselves, why in the Stone Age were holes drilled into people's skull and they lived afterwards? Archaeologists say, well, apparently those were rituals, dealings, and I would say possibly was something wrong with those people. They were either psychologically ill or were epileptics, and how would they have recognized those people that something wasn't going right? And maybe that was the first try to heal sicknesses of the brain. And the sicknesses of the brain and of the psyche were always quickly connected with mystic imaginations, with faith, and this goes up until current times. This morning we heard from Martin the time of Hippocrates, about 400 years before Christ, the teaching of the four juices. There was the idea, in the human body there are four liquids circulating, and if they are not in balance, then a person becomes ill. Defined was the blood, the yellow gall, the black gall, and water or slime or lymph liquids. It was termed and defined a bit differently according to the age. If somebody had too much black gall, then melancholia, then you become sad, and sanguis, the blood, sanguinica, is too much blood. So that was the idea, and then they would relieve people of blood, and a treatment for temperamental disturbances. So about 200 years after Christ, this teaching of the four juices was even expressed more precisely, and it was still there until about 200 years ago in perception of psychological illnesses. We've heard about the Middle Ages as when it was connected to sin, and people were basically punished, that they were punished for being psychologically ill with criminals together, and were locked up with and were tortured or killed, and so on. Then the changeover from the 18th to the 19th century, there was for the first time medical treatment of psychological illness, that you could, they found somebody's actually ill. It's not, he's not possessed by the devil or sinful. Philippe Pinel in France, who was requesting to free the crazy people from their chains, and that psychologically ill people can be treated in hospitals and not in prisons and dungeons. Then, in the 19th century, there was formed the branch of psychology or psychiatry in Europe, or was still closely linked to neurology, and the diagnostic in these days was very much connected to the view of the world. Emil Kraepelin, when he talked about prementia praecox, an early dementia, which often happened between 20 and 30 years old, then he didn't see any possibility for treatment, but they couldn't do anything. It was just an expression. This person has become dementia in an early age, and you can just take care of him. Very little time later, Eugen Bleuler, a Swiss psychiatrist, he termed the term schizophrenia, which means the split soul or split mind. And there's already a little bit of a therapeutical attitude. Yeah, where does this separation come from, this split? How can it possibly be treated? and how can it be overcome? And Mr. Charcot, a French neurologist, he tried to treat hysteria, which was quite common, and he tried to find means by hypnosis. He wanted to know if there was anything in consciousness, in the memory, hidden clues, if there were hidden clues how this illness came about. And this was basically the birth of psychological diagnostics. Sigmund Freud was his student and has started with these observations or this research, then formed the psychoanalysis. And with that, the diagnostic of psychological illnesses was influenced a lot by psychology, and it led from about 1900 till about the end of the 70s, the psychology and the school of therapy in diagnostics was part of it, meaning you diagnosed according to the school of therapy, psychoanalytics. They were looking for suppressed conflicts or suppressed emotions, whereas behavior therapy after 20s and 30s was more learning theories, and that you can learn certain traits or that you can relearn certain abilities and traits. And so it went into different areas and different diagnostic ways these materialized. 1980, there was a DSM-3 came out. It was the classification. DSM means Diagnostics Manual of it came from USA and originally from people surveys. Somewhere during the surveys they said, well, we want to count how many people are psychologically ill, and then there was a little box in the survey of where you could mark the psychologically ill, and then one wanted to separate them a little bit, what type of sickness it is, and more categories were created, and these were the American Psychiatry Society that started this first collection of psychological illnesses, and these, meanwhile, we're at the 5th exhibition of this list of sicknesses. On the 3rd issue, one had more school-specific diagnoses, or one wants a description of the illness independent of therapeutical background, so that everybody who examines a psychologically ill person can specifically sort it into those DSM. DSM is in USA, also in Europe with psychologists. Is it quite common? There's international classification of diseases. This is psychiatry. They're all in the ICD. There are all kind of physical illnesses, and we're at the 10th edition. Next year, the 11th edition should come out. The ICD is issued by the WHO, before that by the UNO, and in the beginning it was statistics of deaths, and one had to give an account of what people died of, and in number 6 and issues 5 and 6 you could also list the sicknesses that are not deadly, and so the catalogue became bigger and bigger, where the illnesses have been described more in detail. DSM-3 from 1980 was very progressive in those days, and the ICD needed another 10 years to catch up, and only in version number 10 one also took these criteria in a similar way, and now the systems are in contact with each other, and one always looks what the others are doing and comes up with a manual diagnostic. A small point. Later, since the 70s and 80s, it came to another medializing in psychiatry, and we heard Mr. Griesinger already, a pioneer in psychiatry. He quoted one sentence, and that is, spiritual illnesses are genetic illnesses, and the biological psychiatry takes up this sentence, and again the social biography and the social surroundings get crossed out, and it's just the patient is looked at as the alone ill, and that's probably a point to criticize, because there you could, it's not how psychological illness starts, it's but always the surroundings as well as from the person himself. So much to psychiatric diagnostics. The part from me might also be a bit dry now. I've thought about it for a long time, if I should even tell you, if I should burden you with it. But to have the current status, that you can say, yes, what could we do better? What do we find important or correct, especially in this field? I have a quote here to begin with. You can only heal the wounds of others if you have wounds yourself. It just has moved me quite a bit, and I'll get back to that, what's expressed here. I'm a psychologist. Manfred is more a medical doctor and psychiatrist, and so we have different ways of looking at diagnostic. And today, diagnostic that happens, that generally valid, it's a bit of both. So I'd like to say something. Diagnostics and psychological diagnostic. I was always interested in the topic. I started when I was 20. I had an analytical psychotherapy because of, through a crisis, let's say I had panic and fear events. So I started a therapy for 3 years, and I went there 2 times a week, and had a lot of dreams and discussed about dreams. That's what you do there most of the time. And through the psychotherapy, there was a certain passion in me to recognize or realize a person, which is like also our title. On the one hand, human beings seem to be the same in a lot of ways. We have all similar needs to feel a belonging, even when we're different. We're we're social beings, and at the same time we're individually quite different. We have different talents and abilities. And C. Jung, who was a student of Freud, but then also had a breakup with him and continued with some of the theories. The spiritual isn't only caused by cause, but soul you can see more by where is it striving for, rather than where it comes from. And with Samuel, that I've come across again very strongly, who asked me in my first hour, well, what do you actually want? What is your longing? Manfred has already explained the word of diagnosis and diagnostics. It's about the process of getting to know, to decide, and psychological is to really get to know a person or a group or an organization, or with questioning, observations, tests and so on. That's sort of in psychology. At the beginning there's something like a question which has to be answered to have a foundation for diagnostical decisions. For example, personality psychology, how to describe a person and how you can recognize it. And of course it has a great meaning in clinical psychology, which then also plays a role in psychiatry. In personal psychology, one tries to see the differences in how people behave between people, or personality traits and so on. To make this clear, I'll take a known example. Some of you might know it. It's the ocean model that was developed. It's a very, in psychology, a very important model, which has been developed over 60 years, and I explain what it is. The beginnings are in the 30s. 3 psychologists, they have in the 30s a lexical approach. They found a lexical approach means you assume that all words describing a personality are in the vocabulary of a language, and that through this vocabulary in language you can get insight into the personality. The aim of psychology in the beginning was, they were not psychologists, but they were natural scientists, electrical engineers. One tried to find a scientific approach, and many thought they could become known amongst psychology. It was very popular in those days. In eugenics, eugenics started in Germany. It didn't start in Germany, but it started in the USA. For example, criminals were identified, and one has looked into how you could avoid that people become criminals. For example, in sterilizing them. That was done in the USA, and the psychology played a role in it, tried to also identify such people with traits of personality, what's different with them from others, people that were considered unworth life, that they could be recognized. These 18,000 terms, there were 18,000 terms, that they had in the end. How they extracted it, I don't know, but they looked into a factor analysis. It's a process that's still being used. It's a method to find data. You have a lot of data, and this data are condensed to have, in the end, factors. For example, there are many variables, and you reduce them to relevant factors, and you try to find out, are there common issues? Is there underlying truth, or are there certain patterns which bring a connection between those variables? So, which common issues are there? And later, when you get these factors, then they try to be interpreted. And for decades, they found 5 stable and also factors that are relevant in culture, that they found the big 5, as they were called. And according to that, every person can get sorted into these, and not as they did before, sorting people into types, they could create individual personality profiles, 5 main dimensions, and that is that every human being can be sorted into 5 scales. Conscientiousness is the first term, which means you're conscientious or perfectionist. And the next is agreeableness. Readiness for cooperation. Das gehört noch dazu, sorry. It's part of it. And neuroticism, it's something like emotional unstableness, vulnerability, and 5-factor openness, openness for experience. For example, have an active life with fantasy, can question norms, and if you don't have a lack of this, then you're rather conservative. I've asked myself if in communities probably there are more people who have a lot of that. So then it was continually developed, and they have a questionnaire, and that's how psychologists now started. This questionnaire has also been used clinically and is still being used for all kinds of things. It gets used in personal choice, but also in clinical psychology. And it was developed that these 5 factors were divided into sub-factors. All that happened between the 30s and 1980s, 90s. It's one of the psychological constructs where there was the most research been done, over 3,000 studies. And so these factors are valid and are pretty stable even across different cultures. They have, to make the clinical importance of it clear, one has decided between fearfulness, impulsiveness, vulnerability, and so you can see the clinical meaning of all this. And then what they did was, every question in the test was answered on a 5-point scale. For example, attitude towards the topic, for example, topic diligence. I like lists. I always write down everything for myself and plan everything. And then I agree partly, somewhat, not at all. And then there are points and different norms that you can look up. And so these tests are done in clinical areas, but not only. But something similar was also used by Cambridge Analytica. It's a company that supposedly was commissioned by Trump and Johnson to check out personalities, and Cambridge Analytica is using such tests, and they had 220 million profiles of adults in the USA, and they gained this from data that they were sold on the internet, and so they were establishing these personality profiles. So there are different profiles. For example, somebody is expressively strong in that area, then he will vote for, and so on. And now, meanwhile, one can predict that pretty accurately. Criticizing all this, I will say something later. Maybe you want to say something how psychiatric diagnostics is being done. Maybe I'll start with the purpose. I won't describe the means, how I do diagnostics when there's a patient and if I want to help him, but I look at the purpose of this diagnostics. For example, in connection with the health insurance. If the health insurance needs to pay, you have to give a diagnosis. Or if somebody needs support in job integration, one has to give a diagnosis for these social insurance companies. And there is a diagnosis manual. You can take one or the other. Us doctors usually work with the IDC-10. And I want to start with an example. Let's say the illness depression. There are criteria, 3 main symptoms: depressive mood, loss of interest and joy, and the third is lack of motivation and easily tiredness. There's sub-symptoms, but if there are 2 of these main symptoms, at least for 2 weeks, most of the time have been there, then you can take the diagnosis of depression, and then you can say it's light, middle or heavy. You can distinguish there. And if we're looking at that now, if it was another medical department, for example, dermatology, the healing of the skin, and you say, oh, I have seen something, it's red, it's spotted, there's pustules and it's itching. Then the head doctor says, yeah, nice, you described it, but now we need to make a diagnosis. But that's where the psychiatric diagnosis already stops. With this illness of the skin, maybe he has chickenpox, and you would have to ask, have you had chickenpox? Well, then it's unlikely that he has chickenpox again. Then one had to ask again, do you have a new piece of clothing or a new detergent? So you want to be more sure, but in psychiatry, you already have enough. Okay, depressed mood more than 2 weeks, of lack of, then you have already a diagnosis. You can hear there's already some criticism from me. If I give a diagnosis just by symptoms, then it's also only a treatment of symptoms. And of course, as a therapist, we're asking, but with a diagnosis, it's irrelevant. And then we ask, what is burdening you? How is it in the family? How is it at your workplace? How is your life story? We want to know more. But the diagnostics, as it is requested now, has completely focused out on that, and that's where we are. And another point of criticism is, in the DSM-5 there's hundreds of diagnoses. What if somebody has something that hasn't been described yet, and that kind of falls through the raster? And what's also not in these books is, what is a healthy psyche? So for me, it was very obvious in forensics how you do. Forensic is the juristic psychiatry, and it was part of the clinic where we had to change. But there are also healthy people, and there are also healthy criminals. So we don't always have to find a diagnosis when somebody commits a crime. Maybe there's other reasons why he did it. And I realized, yeah, we often think in these terms of illness, in categories of illness, because we have this little booklet. Before we had the white coat in your pocket, now it's on my desk. So that's the state of psychiatric diagnostics today. So that means the valid standard how to make a diagnosis are 3 parts, so it's how it goes: clinically psychiatric diagnosis and clinical psychological, which is being refined through more questions, neurological and psychotherapeutic diagnosis, where every psychotherapist has to put into terms and tools of his therapeutical orientation. So it's an important aspect, whether it's conscious or not. This part, you need orientation-specific diagnostics. So, opposed to the diagnostic that Manfred was mentioning, there's also an emotional diagnostics. So the psychological traits that are being registered in a continuum, you can't completely separate them from normal behavior. So it has to be gone by how much they are affected, how there's questionnaires, and then there's certain criteria, there are norm values and so on. It sounds so exact and so precise, and that's the appearance that psychology likes to give itself. You really gain clarity, you have values, and you can trust in. On the one hand, it is more differentiated as just a yes-no categorizing, but I've looked into it quite a bit with this topic, and there are a lot of things which are questionable. You have to say and add, many questionnaires are developed where there's certain interests behind it. There's also an interest in diagnostics. There's an interest to sell medications. So, of course, there's an interest that certain questionnaires bring about positive results. For example, the question, where is the threshold? When does sickness start, illness start? And how this threshold can be figured out by the different values. Because in a questionnaire you can go beyond this threshold by either answering a lot of questions with light or a few with heavy, and then you get, in both cases, you step over the threshold, and in reality it's quite something different. If you have many symptoms that are light, it's a different diagnosis, and it says nowhere in the end, in your report or in your assessment, it doesn't say how this result has come about. And I know, I don't know if it's still at the moment. There was for a long time an alliance of pharmaceutical firms who were developing this type of medications. And so there is the danger of a false positive results. We're already at the point criticism. I've started already. Anti-psychiatry is actually a criticism of psychiatry, and so I won't hold back with criticism. These two of diagnostics, that you make an organ out of the psyche that you can assess like any other organ, that's an important point of criticism. You just open the chapter 5 of the Psyche, and there's 19 chapters, and next to it is the digestive system and neurological diseases, and it gives the impression as if one had understood this organ, when is it ill and how to treat it. And it is not based on anything really. You cannot really make a diagnosis by objective criteria in that way. But on the other hand, there are people who are struggling with difficulties, who don't manage many things in life, but the approach with such pseudo-classification doesn't serve the purpose. And what also is not fitting is between the chapter with psychiatry and the other. In the other illnesses, you can see quite well what to do as a therapy or how much a therapy would cost. For example, if I have arthritis in a joint and I have to replace my hip and knee joint with a prosthesis, then I can say, okay, this is complicated, it costs a lot more, and in hospitals one works with that, in Germany too, with these diagnosis-related compensation, and you get more money for a hip joint than for a knee joint. Now if I have a depressive episode, somebody has to go into a clinic. Who can say that the heavy needs more treatment than the middle heavy episode? But it could be that somebody has a heavy depression, has a good surrounding, and soon he can be released from the clinic. And he has a very understanding boss, and so he can move back into work as much as possible, and it would cost relatively little in comparison to somebody who has a middle-grade depression, lives alone, there's nobody to support him, and the work, he's been fired from work, and there's a long way of reintegration into the job ahead. So with a psyche, with a diagnosis, not even how heavy the illness is, you cannot estimate costs or the extension of treatment. So it's like we're completely hanging in the air, we're grabbing this little blue book, but there's hardly any substance that we have in hand. Do you want to have a bit more criticism?
Ja, also was natürlich sowieso großes Problem ist,
what's a big problem in any case is the separation of diagnostics and therapy. It's very questionable. Often the way it works is at the very beginning, or diagnostic assessments are made without establishing a relationship to your diagnosing. There's like a separation, and one knows that the relationship, that it's very central, even the perception of the one that you have sitting in front of you and his will to change. And this is one of the main problems, that you make this separation, because actually it's not really possible to. That's where the problem starts from the very beginning. The problem of stigmatizing and self-stigmatizing, that patients run around the rest of their lives with such a diagnosis. On my list, I have the theme of power and authority. In diagnostics, there's something happening in true psychotherapy we want to avoid, and that is setting up of roles. We want to encounter human to human, but as soon as I divide into a helping and an ill person, then there is a drop of power, and it is us doctors who have these diagnosis criteria. It's not the patients that have set those up. So now in the newest DSM-5 there are also patients involved, especially in the area of ADHS and autism. There we're slowly moving into a direction where us physicians have to give away this authority to interpret and can listen. And if earlier I listened to the report, I said, wow, that was like a summary of 10 years of psychiatric training. It just went click, 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 and it was all steps that I had to work on, and that I have been summarized by this beautiful report. It takes the affected, the persons with an illness, that they are included and that they can help us understand the illness. Which brings me to a topic which I very much am concerned about. You can describe it, neurodiversity. Daniel has talked about it. It's not about adapting to society, to be normal, but to underline the differences. It came from autistic persons. For example, she's one of the most known autistic persons. She's been a lot in the media. She said people with cognitive diversification can contribute to society that normal people cannot. And meanwhile, autism is not a disturbance, even though it is still being termed as a disturbance. ADHS said there's a strong genetical part, and the more it gets passed on to the children. And neurodiversity starts with the view that people can be more creative or even geniuses, and maybe these are the terms that for thousands of years have brought innovations, scientifically, technically and so on, so that it has makes sense and has a purpose within evolution. Often we bring the Stone Age person who has knocked two stones against each other until he found two that made sparks. He was probably atypical neurologically, but he kept trying different stones as if he was possessed, tried stone upon stone until he finally found the spark. And the people that sit around the campfire, and they can bring a good mood, or they bring wood and knocked. It was somebody, they were ADHS, somebody who brings creativity, who breaks open the old crusted ways. These neurological specialities, they were very important in evolution and important for survival for us. One says that ADHD or autism is a beautiful movie. It's an Indian movie that's just come. How you feel when you're not neurotypical. I've also felt like that in school. You just function differently. But as Danielle said, you have a different type of brain. And that's been researched quite well meanwhile. So one has to take it as its own being. It can also be helpful to imagine the autistic view on normal. So people experience the neurotypical world as chaotic, loud, and a lot less conscious and exact and precise. So people from the autistic spectrum cannot do something that's just on the surface. You can't fool them. That's my experience. So there are also neurodiversity activists that actually the norm is the disturbance. But you could say there's a neurotypical syndrome, so a neurobiological disturbance that can settle in boredness and adaptation and normality. Well, you could see it that way. Autism and ADHS are seen as anomalies in these days. And then there's pollution, vaccinations and so on. I think it's senseless. I don't believe in it. I believe that these people are very special, and meanwhile one also knows that autism does not come from mutations from the parents, no spontaneous genetic mutation, that but that are not inherited, but there's endogenes that are responsible, and they're quite spread out and common, but in some families more common. Autism, legasthenics are not products of modern civilization, but more of an inheritance that makes sense to evolution. And when we look at it consciously, we like to set up a world that caters also to the needs of the most diverse persons and people, so that we bank on strengths and not on deficits. This is completely missing. The description of strengths and resources, it's not there in diagnosis or diagnostics. Autism and ADHD has gained a lot, has grown a lot in recent years, and one likes to call it modern diagnoses, but it has also grown into different directions, and these people just don't manage anymore. They fall out of system, get ill, and have additional psychological illnesses. Because of that, they finally receive treatment. Do I have another 5 minutes? You can term it this way: autism and HDSA, why they are standing out. Autism or HDS, there is a dependency on context. Under special conditions, maybe it works pretty well, or especially well in an activity that where they're gifted for, because they had a certain niche or a certain special area of specialty. And we're living in a world where things are changing all the time. For a long time in Switzerland it was like, okay, durability was important, a business should have a low rate of fluctuation, things were seen in the greater context and so on, but it has changed quite a bit in the last few years. Suddenly in a company, and you've worked there for 30 years, and suddenly there's a change of structure. A new CEO comes from Germany or from the USA, and he mixes up the whole business. And people like that, they completely fall out of the system from one day to another. My father, for example, worked in a metal mill, was closely related to the development and has formed little parts of hundreds of millimeters exact, and he was the best in his department. But he also wasn't liked, he wasn't interested in small talk, and he was quite a loner, maybe even a bit strange, who could only confront people when they weren't telling the truth. When he was 55, so about as old as I am, his department got restructured, and because he was also an epileptic, he was sent into an early pension with the compensation. And because my brother had just started a new shop, he could really use the special trades. My father has put his old workplace in the cellar, and there he worked for my brother for another 15 years and was lucky. My brother was also lucky, and my mother, because otherwise she would have lost it with him. And I'm also happy that I can live in the field of community here. A few weeks ago, to communicate, but also in communicating with the Congress, I wrote a letter to the community. We're all related to each other, that you give a space to me, that I see myself, that you stand by me, that I can be honest with you, and can show myself wholly. My weaknesses, my vulnerabilities. We're all patients and seekers of healing in the field of community. Otherwise, if we hadn't arrived here, we would have gone crazy, or our kids who are autistic or high sensibly, what would have become of them? A few years ago, my own handicap has become obvious to me. Most of my life, I lived with a lack of self-control and self-organization. I had a very wild character and a tendency to edge on and step into it, and during my childhood I liked to hide that I many things couldn't manage. I was very forgetful, and on one hand I had special gifts. On the other hand, I would say in a daily life I'm quite a failure. I can't get things well. I could never understand this discrepancy, and it was a riddle to me. You cannot change it with your will. The more I tried, the worse it got, and the more I got pressure from others, and the more I closed up. That means not all neurotechnical, not everybody functions that way. They can be either autistic or highly sensitive, ADS affected or whatever. But many non-handicapped normal people also have disturbances which are not obvious or conscious to them. Especially many ideas of themselves hide reality and block the process of self-knowledge. Lacking compassion, wanting to be right, being proud. Egotism, extortion, always looking for their own advantage as much as possible, but not wanting to pay the price. Maybe it's time for a new diagnostic system. When we were almost done with the presentation, I read over it again. That was also part of this website. And I said, oh, we actually promised to sketch a diagnostic approach, how we could do it differently. Maybe something to the neurodiversity. It comes from the movement that you looked at, one looked at sexual preferences. One had to fight for being the way they are, whether homosexual or bisexual or asexual, or the identity that they're neither really feel part of the female or male sex, and there's actually a diversity. And in the area of the autistic disturbances, we are also like that. We are not ill while you are healthy, but we are part of a large diversity. And diversity, you have to understand, there is the minority stress. Like a minority is stressed. It is a stress to belong to the minority. It is easier to belong to the majority. It is easier to, the world is adapted to you. When you are heterosexual, you can meet most likely also heterosexual persons. So it's easier to find a relationship and it's less stressful. On the other hand, if you're part of a minority, it is much more difficult, and these people are overwhelmed, and it's too much for them in the social life, and they need more energy to put something together in life and to enact something. and there we're probably just at the beginning of a development that these people, that to include these people. So, what about this diagnostics? What does it look like, the way we do it, with the background that people are neurodiverse? We try mostly to get into contact with the patient, to help him to recognize himself, and even after 200 therapy sessions, that the person still knows best about himself than we ever could. And that's what Samuel Wigma or Krishnamurti meant with self-knowledge. We are helping people to find self-knowledge. And that is the diagnostics, but also the therapy. That's the whole path of accompanying these people. And there will be people amongst you that might say the psychiatric institutions that work there, but there are people that are really absolutely ill, and they're ill because they can't find self-knowledge. A psychotic person cannot find a connection with reality. His perceptions are reality. This morning we heard a quote, I have seen flying dinosaurs, and somebody who is in a psychosis like that, he cannot find a connection. Dinosaurs have been extinct, so I must have been seeing something that doesn't exist. But they are convicted and convinced, and they're the borderline between neurodiversity and also the possibilities of treatment limited. If somebody is not able to and doesn't even want to see, then you can't really help a person. Then therapy is rather an accompaniment. And in our book, True Psychotherapy, Samuel formulated a certain little paragraph as an accompaniment of accompanying the death process. That with some people, well, maybe with you, it's just a matter of accompanying you in death. And maybe it's paradox, but maybe that'll wake up somebody and say, "Nein, I don't want that. I want to find insight," and you get shaken up. But there's also the other side where people are in homes and you have to care for them and you have to structure their everyday life. That is also there. And the political dimension of anti-psychiatry has demanded for these people that they have the same human rights that are valid for them, and that they are members of society of the same worth than anybody else. So this demand is, of course, we can't question that, and it comes from the UNO rights of human rights, but that even somebody who cannot be healed, that he is able to find a humane being, and that he's entitled to it. I have another little example that I formulated, and I'll leave it to the people who will read the Congress book. It'll be printed there. It's also a result of a talk between us, where we also looked at people in the community with challenges, with threesome relationships, and there are completely new diagnostical aspects, or you get to know each other in a new and different way. And on that I've written a little text which will then be published in the Congress book. So now it's officially there. It's over. Thank you.